The story begins in a city divided into two extremes. On one side, a massive, abandoned slum. On the other, a clean, modern district. In the streets of that modern area, people walk around as if nothing had ever happened. And in the middle of the crowd stood the MC, holding a cup of coffee, something he could never find while living in the outskirts. He mentions that he spent every last cent he had just to buy that single drink, and he hopes from the bottom of his heart that the coffee is actually worth it. Without wasting any time, he takes a sip of the drink. But immediately after, he spits it out, complaining that it is far too bitter and feeling completely ripped off for spending his hard-earned cash on it. He thinks to himself that it would have been way better to use that money to buy a piece of real meat. Even though it tastes terrible, he decides to chug the rest just so he can at least stay awake. After that, he tries to toss the cup into the trash can, but completely misses the mark. He then picks the cup up from the ground and decides to throw it away properly. Afterward, he begins walking through the streets once again. Even after having the coffee, he still feels completely exhausted, while everyone glances at him with pure disgust, simply because he is filthy and from the lower slums. The MC thinks to himself that his only goal right now is to gather enough strength to reach the nearest police station, and he keeps repeating to himself that he just needs to hold on a little longer until he gets there. Moments later, he finally arrives at the police station. Inside, it was a high-tech facility filled with multiple officers on duty. One of the officers notices the MC's presence and asks if the kid is lost or needs any kind of help. With a weak voice, our boy reveals that he is here to turn himself in because he has become a carrier of the nightmare spell. The officer is completely taken aback upon hearing that, and right after, the station's emergency alarm begins blaring, declaring an active code black, while the MC realizes that he is now officially one of the infected. It all began decades ago when the terrifying nightmare spell first emerged. At the start, it seemed like nothing more than an illness that caused extreme fatigue and sleepiness. But over time, people realized it was no ordinary condition, but rather a mystical curse or spell. The situation took a turn for the worse, because those who passed away in their sleep turned into vicious monsters, known as nightmare creatures. These monsters began hunting down every single human they crossed paths with. The military stepped in to try and contain the threat. However, conventional firepower proved completely useless against those beasts, and it didn't take long for pure chaos to take over the entire planet. But then, something truly astonishing began to happen. Those who had fallen into the deep slumber caused by the spell began waking up. They were the infected who managed to survive the harrowing trial and had now become awakened. These survivors gained unbelievable supernatural abilities. With this newfound power, they were able to take down the monsters and brought a glimmer of peace back to humanity. As time went on, the Awakened turned into everyone's only hope for survival. They took on the role of global guardians and established a new world order to protect the populace from attacks and to prepare the youth against potential infection. Schools began teaching survival and combat techniques. Wealthy families would spend vast fortunes on specialized training to ensure their heirs would awaken. Furthermore, those born into these elite bloodlines could inherit incredible assets, known as memories and echoes. But our MC knows that this kind of privilege has nothing to do with the reality of an underprivileged street kid like him. For someone in his position, being chosen by the spell is practically a final farewell. Back at the station, 2 guards stand watch at the entrance of a restricted sector. That happens to be the central precinct of the city's northern district. Inside the interrogation room, the detective starts the questioning by asking for our MC's name, and he replies that his name is Sunless, but adds that everyone usually just calls him Sunny. The officer finds the name quite unusual, and Sunny explains that he was born during a solar eclipse, plus his mother had a poetic side. The detective then asks if he should notify his family, but the MC simply answers that there is no one left to contact. The officer asks how much longer he can stay awake, and Sunny replies that he won't be able to hold out for much longer. The detective decides to skip the pleasantries, tells him to pay close attention, and asks what he actually knows about the nightmare spell. Sunny replies that the spell is all about entering the dream realm and taking down whatever monsters show up, and that all one has to do is clear the first nightmare to gain magical powers and finally become awakened. The officer realizes the boy at least knows the basics, but urges him to listen carefully to the actual details. He warns that in the first nightmare, the young man won't just run into monsters, but other people as well, though he cautions that they aren't real. He explains that these people are merely illusions created to test him, which leaves Sunny quite curious about how they even know that. The detective mentions that the MC might have to take them down, so he must always remember that everything is just an illusion. Sunny was gradually growing more and more exhausted, while the officer instructs him to check his attributes and aspect the moment he enters the nightmare. He explains that things will be much easier if he lands a combat-oriented aspect, like a swordsman or an archer. And even if he gets a non-combat aspect, he shouldn't panic, as there is no such thing as a truly useless aspect. He adds that the spell creates survival trials rather than monster-clearing quests, so he must do whatever it takes to stay alive, because his actions throughout the trial will determine the rewards and powers he receives if he manages to pull through. After that, the officer puts on a dead serious look and warns the MC that if he falls in there, his physical vessel will turn into a gateway for a monster to breach Earth. And if that happens, he and the other officers will have to put it down. Seeing that Sunny is drifting off, the officer practically begs him not to lose the trial, or at the very least not go down right off the bat, explaining that the nearest awakened will take time to arrive, so it would be ideal if the local officers didn't have to face the beast alone. At that moment, an eerie voice echoes out, welcoming the new aspirant into the perilous nightmare spell. Suddenly, the MC finds himself standing on top of a massive stone mountain. Looking around, he wonders where on Earth he just ended up. He glances up at the sky and notices that the moon is moving at an unnaturally rapid pace. After that, a blinding flash illuminates the sky, and the MC notices the snow drifting backward into the clouds, as if time in this place were flowing in reverse. Something then leaves the MC even more stunned. Right in front of him, a pile of skeletal remains lay scattered across the snow. Seeing that the remains were clad in armor, he wonders if a full-scale battle took place here, or perhaps a total wipeout. Suddenly, something strange starts happening to the MC. He feels as though his mind is completely overloaded with information. It felt as if he were right on the verge of awakening. The system then issues an alert, telling him to prepare for his first survival trial. Right at that moment, he is shocked to realize that he has been placed in heavy chains. Looking down at his own body, he realizes he looks just like an enslaved captive, and all around him were several people in the exact same predicament, escorted by armed soldiers. The MC recalls that aspirants usually start off with major advantages, often as elite warriors or members of noble houses, so he wonders why on earth he was thrown into the worst possible position as a captive. The MC then realizes just how terrible his luck is and concludes that this is the worst starting scenario he could have possibly received. Out of nowhere, glowing blue letters appear right before his eyes. Sunny realizes he has never seen runes quite like those before, yet somehow he is able to comprehend the exact meaning of every single word. The interface reveals that his name is Sunless, his current rank is Aspirant, and he does not yet possess any special memories or echoes. Next, he sees his three primary attributes: Faded, Mark of Divinity, and the Shadow Child trait. Knowing that the spell usually balances severe handicaps with solid rewards, he crosses his fingers for a top-tier aspect. However, he falls into utter despair upon seeing that his aspect has been designated as Temple Slave, described as virtually worthless. Boiling with anger over the line the detective fed him back at the precinct, Sunny realizes he was completely misled in the worst possible way. The system explains that his faded attribute will constantly draw highly improbable events toward him, both good and bad. While reading through the interface, he ends up tripping over a rock and yanks the chains connecting him to the captives behind him. The captive behind him loses his temper and begins shouting, asking if the kid is looking for an early grave. Sunny decides not to pay him any mind and chooses to ignore the man to avoid stirring up even more trouble at that moment. The large man in front mentions that the MC is going to freeze out here, while Sunny thinks to himself that the nightmare is definitely going to throw monsters at them. The big guy wonders how many of them will actually make it out of this freezing mountain, but the angry prisoner snaps back that he intends to survive no matter what. Sunny finds their bickering amusing, while a third captive mentions that the weather is completely against them and advises the blonde guy to leave the kid alone. The blonde prisoner asks why, and his companion asks if he hasn't noticed the mysterious markings on the boy's skin yet. He explains that, unlike the rest of them who became captives over crimes or debts, Sunny was born into this state and is specifically a temple slave. The system displays the overview of Sunny's divine mark, but the blonde prisoner doesn't care much and asks what difference that even makes in their current situation. The older captive explains that the Empire recently brought down the final temple of the Shadow God, suspecting that is precisely how the young man was captured. He warns his companion, asking if he truly wants to risk getting on the bad side of a deity. A mounted soldier approaches, asking if there is an issue going on, but one of the prisoners plays it off, claiming they are just freezing. The captive adds that he was merely worried the trek might be too rough on the kid. Surprisingly, the guard calmly tells the boy to hang in there a bit longer, as they will set up camp the moment the sun goes down. Sunny is quite annoyed at being called a kid, considering he is nearly 17 years old, and the soldier doesn't seem much older than him. Acting friendly, the young soldier extends a canteen, offering some water so the boy can stay hydrated. Sunny remains completely quiet, taking in the charitable gesture from an armed man in the middle of such a harsh march. He accepts the water, but wonders if that captor genuinely believes handing over a single sip makes him a decent guy. Suddenly, the sharp crack of a whip tearing through the air startles every single prisoner in line. A much older, ruthless commander strikes the young soldier with the whip right in the snow over his act of kindness. Watching the harsh strike unfold right before his eyes, Sunny cannot hold back a smirk of pure satisfaction. The commander barks angrily, asking what he thinks he is doing, while the rookie tries to explain that he was simply offering the boy some water. The man tells the rookie to shut his mouth, warning him that captives are not his friends and shouldn't even be treated as equals. He threatens that if he catches the rookie fraternizing with the prisoners again, it will be his own back taking the lash next time. As he continues marching through the snow, the MC vows to himself that he will find a way to settle this humiliation before his time is up. With a look full of rage and bitterness, Sunny sets his mind on making sure he gets to see that arrogant commander go down first. He also glances toward the young soldier who tried to help him, fully aware that the rookie's fate won't be any different from the rest of the guards. With cold anger in his eyes, the boy thinks that the rookie will definitely be next in line to pay for all of this. Time goes by, and the sun finally begins sinking behind the massive, snow-covered mountains, marking the end of another exhausting day. The commander pulls on the reins of his mount and barks an order for everyone to halt the march immediately, stating that the unit will set up camp right there for the night. The freezing night blankets the mountains, and the camp is pitched near massive rock faces with campfires roaring to keep everyone warm. While the soldiers gather around the fires chatting casually, the captives are tossed a bit of food to replenish their strength. Sitting on the icy ground, Sunny chews with great difficulty on a rock-hard piece of bread handed out by the camp guards. Near him, the other captives also eat in silence while complaining about the sheer cruelty of the Empire's soldiers. The blonde prisoner vents that the food was way better back in the dungeon, despite knowing full well that most of them were slated for the gallows there. Watching the man scarf it down, Sunny thinks to himself that the guy complains non-stop, yet is clearing his plate just fine. Since they are all shackled together, the young man knows he has no choice, but decides he will try to keep his distance from the group as much as possible. He closes his eyes and takes a deep breath, noticing how crisp the mountain air is, something he could never experience in the polluted real world back in the city. Thinking that being chosen by the spell at least has the silver lining of fresh air, he decides to bring up the interface to inspect his attributes once more. The boy triggers the glowing interface, feeling he wasn't able to properly look over the details earlier due to all the chaos. He zeroes in on the Shadow Child attribute, which displays a brief line stating that the shadows now recognize him as one of their own. Sunny finds that detail incredibly intriguing and tries to figure out what it actually means in practice. Curious about the perks of being acknowledged by the shadows, the boy turns around to observe the pitch-black perimeter of the camp. Much to his astonishment, the entire darkened campsite and the fine details of the night begin to light up magically across his field of vision. With his eyes glowing, he realizes in total shock that he can see absolutely everything with crystal clarity, even in pure darkness. Nearby, a captive swats the blonde man's hand away to stop him from plucking a red berry from the snow, warning that eating it would be dangerous. He explains that the berry only grows where human blood has been spilled, such as battlegrounds, but the starving blonde man couldn't care less. The older man then reveals that the plant is extremely toxic and capable of taking down a grown man in an instant. Upon hearing that, the blonde tosses the fruit away in sheer panic and snaps that his companion should have mentioned that much sooner. However, the detail regarding where that plant thrives triggers a massive red flag in Sunny's mind concerning the path they are walking. He begins to carefully survey the entire mountainous landscape around him, getting an unsettling feeling that this terrain looks awfully familiar. Suddenly, the pieces begin to click in Sunny's mind as he makes a rapid connection between the facts. He instantly remembers the countless armor-clad remains he saw when time reversed right after his arrival. He notices that the remains on the ground were shackled in the exact same manner he is right now. All at once, panic sets in as the horrifying truth behind this location dawns on him. A deafening roar of an ambush shatters the silence of the night, catching Sunny completely off guard. The boy's eyes widen as he realizes that everyone present is about to meet a violent end. The first body of a shackled captive drops to the ground, utterly torn apart and covered in crimson. The boy recoils in shock as he witnesses the brutal takedown occur right next to him in the blink of an eye. Right then, he spots something moving. One of the armed guards attempts to fight back, but is violently hurled against the ground by the creature. The entire camp turns into an absolute war zone of destruction within mere seconds. Shadowy, terrifying figures begin darting rapidly through the surrounding trees. The seasoned commander stands in utter shock at the sheer level of devastation sweeping through the site. One of the soldiers screams in sheer panic for the captain to look toward the crest of the stone cliff. High above, a monstrous silhouette overlooks the camp while the captives scream for help. The captain draws his shining blade and barks at all the soldiers to get on their feet and brace for combat. Multiple creatures begin descending the cliff face, shrouded in an eerie, ominous mist. The glowing eyes of the beasts multiply in the pitch-black night, completely encircling the campsite. The unit leader trembles with a mix of fury and fear, admitting he had no clue monsters even roamed these parts. But in the blink of an eye, one of the closest creatures vanishes entirely into the dark. The captain panics upon realizing that the monster simply vanished right before his eyes. He orders everyone onto high alert, while one of his men tries to shout a warning about something right behind them. Before the guard can finish his sentence, a swift, lethal strike rips through the air with immense force. Crimson splatters intensely, coating the frozen mountain ground in the wake of the sudden ambush. A sinister beast emerges from the shadows directly in front of the captives, who tremble in total terror. One of the men screams, asking what that thing is, while another complains that it is far too dark to see anything. The monster reveals a massive maw packed with razor-sharp fangs, ready to devour its first target. In a split second, the creature lunges forward and brutally clamps down on one of the prisoners. Sunny watches the scene in absolute horror, realizing that the situation is far too violent and terrifying to process. The large prisoner completely loses his composure, seeing the brutal end of the companion right beside him. The monster drags the fallen body away, while the remaining survivors scream frantically for backup. The beast turns its gaze back toward the group, its jaws dripping with crimson and its eyes burning with fury. The monster raises its razor-sharp claw and slashes once more toward the terrified captives. The blow lands squarely on the large man beside him, but Sunny manages to swiftly dodge the incoming attack. Panting and terrified, the young man realizes he narrowly dodged a fatal blow right there. The beast hurls the fallen prisoner to the ground and gears up to tear through the rest of the group. In total desperation, the surviving captives begin scattering in panic to escape the beast's reach. But because he is chained to the heavy body of the fallen man, Sunny is forcefully dragged down to the ground. He scrambles desperately to shove the heavy weight off him so he can break free and make a run for it. The boy lets out a shout of pure frustration and panic, seeing that he is still pinned right in the hot zone. With one final surge of effort, he finally manages to roll the heavy body off to the side. He glances at the motionless prisoner, wondering in shock if the man has truly met his end. Sunny hears the frantic screams and thinks that, as bad as things are, it could be even worse for him. The boy notices that the beast chose to pursue the other fleeing captives, calling every single one of them fools. The surviving guards shout for everyone to sprint toward the dark forest to take cover. Sunny watches the scene and thinks they are signing their own warrants, because without a fire, everyone will freeze out there. The boy warns the blonde that running into the pitch black is pure madness, but the man snaps back that he would rather freeze than end up as Monster Chow. Desperate, the blonde begins violently tugging the chains, ordering Sunny to follow him so they can hide. However, something abruptly stops the blonde dead in his tracks, and the person holding him back was none other than our MC. The blonde snaps, asking why he isn't moving, and the MC explains that he is tethered to the big guy's body. Suddenly, the big guy's body begins to twitch, startling both of them and making the MC wonder if the man is somehow still breathing. However, the large man was actually undergoing a horrific mutation, transforming into a beast right before their very eyes. Sunny stands completely frozen at the sight. He quickly realizes that this transformation makes no sense at all. He recognizes that the entity is a tyrant, an extraordinarily high-tier entity that should never appear in a first nightmare. He then wonders if this catastrophe is the fault of his fated attribute, which constantly reels in the absolute worst possible outcomes. The system interface flashes the description of Sunny's fated trait once again, showing how it draws sheer bad luck straight to him. Sunny then screams at his companion that they need to take the monster down before its transformation is fully complete. But the prisoner is so paralyzed with fear that he can barely even move. Sunny decides to take matters into his own hands, announcing that he will wrap the chain around the creature's neck and telling the blonde to pull with everything he has on his mark. He manages to loop the chain around the creature's throat and yells for his companion to haul back. Both of them pull with every ounce of strength they possess to shut down the beast's transformation. Sunny was completely determined, shouting at the top of his lungs for that vile thing to go down. Even though the other captive was terrified out of his mind, he was also putting everything he had into the pull. With that, the creature gradually begins to lose its steam, and the system flashes a confirmation that they successfully brought down the Mountain King's larva, which was still in a dormant state. Right after, the lifeless form of the beast thuds against the ground. Completely drained, Sunny can hardly believe he actually took down a Mountain King, realizing just how close of a call that was. Sunny's companion was equally stunned by the whole ordeal, celebrating that they actually managed to eliminate the monster. While the other guy celebrates, Sunny thinks to himself that he only has 3 seconds to catch his breath before dealing with the next nightmare. The blonde then looks over and asks what their next move should be to stay in one piece. Right then, the MC notices that they are completely surrounded by a horde of monsters. He lets out a deep sigh, thinking that this place is absolute madness, and desperately hopes he can wake up from this nightmare soon. One of the monsters locks its eyes onto the MC and immediately lunges right at him. However, the MC was braced to fight back using his heavy chains. The creature launches a vicious strike, but Sunny stays fully alert. Yet, something entirely unexpected happens. Someone extraordinarily powerful cleaves right through the creature. Within seconds, the guard had completely dismantled the beast. Sunny is shocked to see that particular guard again. It was the rookie soldier who had tried to hand him water earlier on. That guard was in the zone, completely focused, and one by one, he begins wiping out the beasts at staggering speed, making the MC think he looks just like a hero. However, he quickly dismisses the thought, figuring the soldier is just showing off. Moments later, the guard finally puts down the last of the beasts. Sunny remains suspicious, trying to piece together the real motive behind his actions. The soldier turns back toward our MC, tosses the key in his direction, and tells him to catch it fast. Sunny catches the key, still trying to wrap his head around why the guard would do that, since that was the very key to unlock his shackles. The young soldier turns around, telling the MC to use the key and save his own skin. After saying that, the soldier makes a swift exit from the area. Even with the key in hand, Sunny recalls that back in the slums, people who are nice for no apparent reason are always the most dangerous of all. But with no time to waste over second thoughts, he moves quickly and begins using the key to unlock his cuffs. Moments later, he was completely free of all the chains. Sunny then thinks to himself that those who put them through this humiliation will pay dearly for it, swearing that payback will definitely come around. Seeing that the boy is free, the nearby prisoner calls out to the MC. He reaches out, begging Sunny to unlock his cuffs as well, even though the MC finds the guy pretty obnoxious. Sunny figures that letting him loose won't cost him a single thing right now. The older prisoner also steps forward calmly, asking if the boy could free him too. Sunny concludes that having extra hands around is a plus, since there is strength in numbers during a high-stakes crisis. The older captive begins walking toward him, and moments later, everyone is unbound, prompting one of them to cheer, believing the heavens are finally smiling upon them. However, the blonde questions why they are just standing around when the guards are busy holding off the beasts, stating that this is their prime window to escape. But the older man questions where they would even go, since without fire they would simply freeze out there. The blonde shouts frantically that he refuses to turn into a monster, threatening to crack his companion's skull if he tries offering advice again. To put an end to the bickering, Sunny steps up and coldly tells them to head over to the skirmish area to get a read on the situation. The others call him insane for wanting to get closer to the monster, but Sunny knows the beast won't stop hunting until everyone is wiped out. He figures he has nothing left to lose, as he is practically a goner anyway, and things can't get much worse. With that mindset, he decides to stop worrying about the fallout and simply presses forward. Back at the camp, the monster was tearing through everything in its path. The terrified captive asks what their plan is now that they've seen the grim reality of the battle up close. Tucked behind a boulder, the blonde whispers that Sunny has lost his mind for staying this calm, but the older man tells him to keep it down. Tuning them both out, Sunny keeps a sharp eye on the monster, deep in thought as he tries to find a way to bring the thing down. Out of nowhere, the young rookie soldier lets out a battle cry to draw the monster's focus and charges in fearlessly to take it on. Sunny realizes this is the exact opening he needed, while the other captive silently roots for the young soldier to pull through. However, the monster didn't seem fazed in the slightest. The soldier lands a strike, calling the creature a vile abomination. However, his blade fails to pierce the beast's thick hide. Frustrated by his inability to breach the monster's defense, the soldier begins falling back. Still, things were not going to be that easy for him. The creature swings violently aimed straight at the soldier's head, but he ducks just in the nick of time. And while that intense showdown unfolded, the captives remained crouched behind a boulder, taking it all in. The blonde comments that the rookie soldier won't be able to hold his ground in this fight for much longer. Sunny silently agrees and begins scanning the surroundings for anything he can turn into a weapon, mapping out a strategy in his head. That is when he spots a large cargo wagon sitting nearby. He concludes that since he doesn't have the raw power to bring down the beast on his own, he will let the mountain's gravity do the heavy lifting for him. Without a second thought, Sunny bolts toward the wagon and yells for the other captives to follow if they want to make it out alive. The blonde hesitates, asking if they are really about to follow that crazy kid again, but his companion figures this might just be a stroke of luck. The older prisoner tells them to put their faith in the kid just one more time, and the frustrated blonde gives in. If you want the next part, make sure to like and drop a comment.